The account begins with the discovery of an anomalous object that washed ashore following a period of unusually strong tidal activity, and the object in question presented itself as a single massive tooth-like structure measuring nearly the 40 height of an adult human and weighing an amount far exceeding what would be expected of any known biological sample, and its composition analysis initiated the first phase of scientific investigation, revealing characteristics that challenged established understanding of marine biology, paleontology, and oceanographic processes simultaneously. And the structure displayed an enamel-like surface, though far denser than enamel from any known species, with a mineralization pattern more consistent with high-pressure geological formations than with biological tissues normally formed within the constraints of cellular processes. And, despite its immense density, the structure maintained a smooth curvature, suggesting a growth pattern indicative of biological methodology rather than tectonic formation. And this contradiction between biological morphology and geological density became the foundation of a long chain of investigative efforts that sought to reconcile how such an object could exist within the constraints of Earth's known evolutionary pathways. And the tooth-like object was found embedded in a cluster of consolidated sand and organic debris, indicating that it had not lain on the shoreline for long and was likely transported from a deeper marine region during an anomalous upcurrent event triggered by the unusual tidal conditions that week. And oceanographic sensors registered a brief but powerful density inversion offshore, only hours before the object was discovered, suggesting that the tooth may have been carried upward by a sudden vertical flow event, potentially caused by rapid displacement within an underwater trench, or by the collapse of a subaqueous sediment platform releasing long, isolated materials into the pelagic zone. And further analysis revealed microscopic scoring on the enamel surface, arranged in Celter patterns inconsistent with post-depositional abrasion, suggesting interaction with an unknown form of friction or mechanical pressure that did not resemble bite marks or tool traces from any documented source. And these patterns raised questions regarding whether the tooth had functioned within a jaw apparatus or whether it represented a structural element of an organism employing a form of feeding or environmental interaction distinct from the mechanisms observed in known marine fauna, and laboratory evaluations of internal microstructure using high-energy imaging arrays revealed a complex arrangement of tubular cavities running longitudinally through the object, though these cavities lacked pulp, remnants, collagen fibers, or any organic residue typically expected within mammalian or reptilian dentition, instead presenting as hollow microtunnels lined with crystalline deposits resembling hydrothermal accretion more than biological material, suggesting that the tooth may have undergone mineral substitution processes typically observed only in fossils preserved over millions of years, yet the surface exterior displayed no sign of fossilization, no sediment infiltration, and no compression imprint, consistent with ancient burial, indicating that the structure represented a hybrid of recent deposition and ancient preservation, with no known mechanism bridging the two states. And these contradictions drew the attention of interdisciplinary teams, seeking to determine whether the object represented evidence of an undiscovered extant species, a relic of a prehistoric organism dislodged from sediments, or a manifestation of deep ocean processes capable of preserving organic morphologies in ways not previously documented. And as these teams examined the isotopic distribution across the enamel surface, they detected irregular ratios of oxygen isotopes inconsistent with marine organisms living at typical ocean temperatures, suggesting that the tooth may have originated from a region where water temperatures remain near constant values, far below those of known deep-sea biomes, implying an environment with unusual thermal regulation conditions potentially linked to suboceanic hydrothermal systems or geothermal anomalies. And accompanying analysis of trace elements revealed heightened concentrations of rare earth minerals, particularly lanthanum and neodymium, at levels disproportionate to known marine biological accumulation processes, but consistent with sedimentary environments located near volcanic vents, raising further questions about the Dimery process. Possibility that the tooth originated from a location where geological and biological conditions intersect to produce hybridized structures not represented in current taxonomic frameworks, and the absence of biological residue within the tubules normally associated with tooth vascularization suggested that either the tooth belonged to a species employing a fundamentally different biological architecture, or that the organic components had been selectively replaced through a mineral deposition process capable of preserving fine structural details while eliminating cellular remnants. And this mystery deepened as researchers observed that the internal crystalline deposits displayed growth patterns inconsistent with long-term fossilization, instead showing layering that appeared episodic, suggesting exposure to cycles of mineral saturation and depletion in an environment with highly staged mineral variable chemical gradients. And these conditions do not match any known marine habitat, prompting new inquiries into whether undiscovered deep ocean geological formations might host extreme chemical oscillation cycles capable of generating mineral accretion states found nowhere else on the planet. And further complicating interpretation was the distinct curvature and taper of the structure, which resembled the tooth of a predatory species, though scaled to dimensions far exceeding known megafauna, including prehistoric apex predators, such as megalodon, whose largest known teeth remain significantly smaller and whose enamel composition differs materially from the anomalous object, and attempts to compare the structure with fossil records revealed no direct taxonomic analog, though some morphology suggested distant similarity to early marine reptiles. Yet the density and composition diverged sharply from any such lineage, indicating that if the object were biological, it originated from a creature unprecedented within current evolutionary understanding, and alternative hypotheses proposed that the tooth may not belong to an NTN organism, but instead represent a structural component from an unknown deep-sea formation, possibly the hardened tip of a mineral chimney shaped by water flow, in ways mimicking biological morphology, though this explanation faltered when internal structure failed to match any known hydrothermal vent formation pattern and lacked the porosity consistent with vent-derived materials. And the question of origin became further complicated when ocean floor mapping conducted in the 5 region following the discovery revealed a series of linear depressions and sedimentary disturbances extending several kilometers offshore, suggestive of large-scale movement of either an object or a fluid boundary along the seafloor only. Days before the tooth washed ashore, and these disturbances displayed symmetrical edges but no accompanying drag marks, implying a mode of movement not reliant on physical contact with the substrate, but potentially driven by hydrodynamic displacement or gravitational anomalies. And the timing of these disturbances correlated with the recorded density inversion event, lending weight to the idea that an unknown dynamic process operating at significant depth may have brought the object upward and carried it toward the shoreline. And these correlations fueled speculation regarding whether the tooth was carried by a fluid boundary event similar to those observed in rare deep ocean phenomena, where density gradients align to produce coherent displacement waves, capable of transporting large mass fragments across vertical distances without turbulence. And if the tooth were transported by such a boundary, this would imply that it originated from a depth far beyond typical sampling ranges, potentially from a region where known biological processes cannot function due to extreme pressure and near-freezing temperatures. And yet, the morphology of the object suggested adaptation to mechanical stress consistent with predatory behavior, raising questions about how such an organism could exist in an environment lacking sufficient energy sources to sustain large biological time structures. And this contradiction prompted researchers to explore whether the tooth may represent a remnant from a species adapted to exploit energy gradients in ways unknown to conventional biology, perhaps through chemosynthetic feeding strategies or through interactions with deep ocean energy fields that allow large organisms to exist in low-nutrient environments. And examinations of internal grain orientation revealed unusual directional consistency, suggesting that the tooth was shaped by repetitive forces acting along a consistent axis, though the magnitude of these forces would need to be immense to generate the observed density distribution, raising further questions about the potential size, strength, and ecological role of a hypothetical organism capable of producing such a structure. And scientists further explored isotopic anomalies within the object, identifying traces of clues. Nitrogen isotopes absent from typical marine pathways, implying that the tooth did not originate from any known trophic web and may have been isolated from biological cycles entirely for a significant duration before resurfacing and deeper. Chemical scans detected microfracture patterns filled with compounds characteristic of high-pressure fractures found in subduction zones, suggesting that the tooth may have spent an extended period near tectonic boundaries where mineral saturation variability could induce episodic crystallization events within hollow biological structures, replacing organic material gradually in a pattern distinct from fossilization and more akin to hybrid mineral infusion processes seldom observed in natural environments. And these microfracture fillings corresponded temporally to geological cycles rather than biological wear, indicating that the tooth's preservation was influenced by tectonic rhythm rather than environmental conditions associated with living organisms. And this observation supported emerging theories that the tooth may represent a relic from a species no longer extant or one that exists only in extreme deep ocean environments, rarely interacting with shallower ecosystems and leaving no trace within traditional biological surveys. And as research continued, scientists assembled environmental data for the region and discovered a persistent electromagnetic anomaly, detectable in the upper mantle footprint of the seafloor, corresponding to the same period during which the tooth likely surfaced, and this anomaly resembled signatures associated with mineral charge displacement events, hinting that tectonic stress changes may have triggered a release event, dislodging deep sedimentary structures and carrying them upward through density inversion currents. And in the context of this model, the tooth may represent one of many long-buried biological remnants preserved in high-pressure mineral matrices, then released into the water column during episodic stress events, though the lack of sediment coating and the pristine preservation of the tooth's surface challenged this interpretation, as objects dislodged from deep sediments typically display abrasion, weathering, or microfossil adherence, none of which were present here. And the absence of such surface markers suggests either that the tooth was released from an environment isolated from sedimentation entirely, or that its surface composition repelled particulate adhesion in a manner that does not align with known biological or mineralogical mechanisms. And this prompted further examination of the surface coating, which revealed a nanostructured layer of unknown origin composed of densely packed crystalline networks arranged in a pattern that enhanced resistance to microabrasion and inhibited biofouling, a property not found in any known biological enamel, but theoretically possible through mineral self-assembly in environments subject to high-frequency pressure waves and electromagnetic flux. And if this coating formed, naturally it would require environmental conditions drastically different from those encountered in typical marine ecosystems, suggesting the existence of deep ocean niches that support exotic chemical processes capable of shaping biological structures in unprecedented ways. And as this line of inquiry deepened, researchers began to consider whether the tooth represented evidence of an alternative evolutionary crystalline pathway driven not by traditional biological pressures, but by geophysical forces shaping organismal morphology through energy field interaction rather than through purely biochemical processes. And this concept, though speculative, opened discussions about the possibility that life in extreme depths may exploit physical gradients in ways that produce physical adaptations not predictable under standard evolutionary models. And if such organisms exist, their biology may not rely on organic molecules in the same manner as known species, instead blending biological and mineral components to withstand extreme pressure and operate in environments where traditional metabolic pathways are impossible, and the tooth therefore becomes not only a question of species identification, but of fundamental biological possibility, challenging assumptions regarding the limits of life on Earth and extending inquiry into how extreme environments guide the present development of complex structures beyond the constraints seen in shallower ecosystems. As analytical efforts intensify, the scientific community broadens its investigative scope to determine whether the human-sized tooth-like structure represents a biological artifact from an unknown species, a geological product shaped through processes not yet understood, or an intermediate form resulting from interactions between deep ocean and energy fields and organic material. And this expanded approach leads to the formulation of new multidisciplinary models that attempt to reconcile the object's biological morphology with its mineralogical composition, revealing increasingly complex intersections between evolutionary biology, geophysics, hydrodynamics, and deep-sea chemistry. And these models begin by examining the curvature and taper of the structure, which follow logarithmic principles consistent with functional load distribution patterns commonly seen in biological adaptations, but the density measurements contradict expectations by exceeding values sustainable by typical collagen-supported enamel and suggesting instead a composite structure formed from organic precursors, subjected to prolonged mineral infusion under extreme pressure conditions not available in conventional marine environments. And further investigations into the object's refractive properties reveal subtle optical anisotropy along its longitudinal axis, indicating that crystalline alignment occurred directionally rather than randomly, implying exposure to an oriented electromagnetic field over extended periods. And this realization leads researchers to explore whether the tooth developed originally as a biological structure but later underwent transformational modification through mineral deposition, influenced by deep ocean energy fields, producing a hybrid artifact, neither fully biological nor geological. And this hybridization concept gains traction as scientists discover that the internal tubules, once mistaken for vascular channels, display uniform cross-sectional geometry, inconsistent with organic tissue degradation, and more consistent with long-term mineral accretion within hollow biological pathways where original organic materials decayed or dissolved under pressure, leaving behind cavities subsequently filled or coated with crystalline formations generated by oscillating chemical gradients. And these gradients may reflect environmental oscillations occurring within previously unknown deep ocean microhabitats, where temperature, salinity, and mineral concentration fluctuate in cyclical patterns driven by geothermal pulses and tectonic microvibrations, creating the conditions necessary for episodic mineral infusion into biological substrates. And as researchers assess the likely origins of the object, they examine seafloor regions with unusually high mineral flux as potential source environments, and deep-sea cartographic modeling identifies a series of subterranean canyons marked by irregular thermal signatures and unexplained electromagnetic drift patterns, suggesting that these regions may host unique chemical environments conducive to the formation and preservation of composite biological mineral structures. These canyons lie adjacent to tectonic uplift zones, known for periodic stress release events, which may trigger density inversion currents, capable of transporting relic materials to shallower depths and possibly to the surface as observed. In the anomalous shore deposition of the tooth and geophysical monitoring instruments confirm that the uplift zone experienced a subtle shift around the time the tooth surfaced MA, RKD, by harmonic tremor signatures, indicative of mineral fracturing processes deep within the crust, and these signatures resemble those associated with the release of long isolated geological materials into the water column, supporting the hypothesis that the object may have been dislodged from a deep canyon environment, sealed off from conventional sediment flow and chemical exchange, allowing for preservation conditions drastically different from those in typical marine habitats. And meanwhile, experimental analysis of the surface nanostructure reveals its unique capacity to resist dissolution under acidic and alkaline conditions, indicating that it serves as a protective layer capable of preserving internal atol days. Structure, even in chemically volatile environments, possibly functioning as a naturally formed barrier against corrosive hydrothermal fluids that might otherwise degrade biological material completely, and this protective nanocoating may to originate from mineral self-assembly, triggered by exposure to electromagnetic oscillations, similar to those detected in the uplift zone. And if such self-assembly occurs within deep ocean environments, it may represent an unknown natural process through which biological relics acquire extended longevity and structural preservation far exceeding that of conventional fossils, which degrade or mineralize uniformly rather than selectively retaining high-fidelity structural geometry. And at this stage, researchers confront the possibility that the object may represent the preserved tooth of a species adapted to extreme pressure, low energy, deep ocean habitats, where metabolism operates differently from known life, perhaps relying on inorganic energy sources or field interactions rather than traditional food webs. And this possibility challenges existing assumptions about the energy requirements for large biological forms, as the size and density of the structure imply that the originating organism must have possessed extraordinary strength or unique feeding strategies not observed in modern marine predators. Attempts to model the bite force necessary to support such a tooth yield implausibly high values unless the organism utilized non-muscular means of exerting mechanical pressure, possibly through hydrodynamic amplification, or by exploiting environmental energy fields to apply force with efficiency unmatched by known biological systems. And these radical possibilities motivate researchers to explore analogies between the teeth of the anomalous structure and hypothetical feeding mechanisms that might operate in field-interacting organisms where mechanical functions could be facilitated by electromagnetic field coupling or by leveraging pressure differentials rather than conventional muscular contraction. And while such mechanisms remain unproven, they offer explanations for the object's immense density, which could be necessary to withstand mechanical stresses unique to such unconventional feeding processes. And turning toward alternative scenarios, researchers investigate whether the tooth may represent an inorganic geological formation shaped by long-term interaction with water currents, minerals, and electromagnetic fields producing a form that mimics biological geometry, yet arises from purely physical processes. And though certain mineral accretion patterns resemble those found in the object, the absence of sedimentary lamination, the internal tubular geometry, the biomorphic curvature all contradict purely geological explanations and reinforce the interpretation of biological origin modified by environmental factors, rather than replaced entirely, and isotope analyses further challenge geological interpretations as the object contains isotopic traces matching biological patterns rather than geological deposition, indicating that the structure did originate from a living entity, though one radically different from known organisms. And these findings force scientists to confront the possibility that life in the deep ocean may be far more diverse and structurally complex than currently understood, capable of producing biological materials, adapted not through organic chemistry alone, but through integration with mineral and electromagnetic environmental dynamics in ways not represented in existing evolutionary models. And to test these theories, researchers compare microstructural patterns within the tooth to known fossilized remains from extinct species and find distant parallels to primitive marine reptiles and early marine vertebrates, though with significant deviations in mineral alignment, density, and microchannel organization, suggesting that the tooth may represent a lineage that diverged from known evolutionary pathways before the establishment of modern marine ecosystems, or that it evolved independently. Why? Within a deep ocean isolation zone, with conditions enabling structural innovations impossible elsewhere. And paleontologists propose that such isolation zones may have existed for millions of years, preserving ancient lineages or spawning entirely new ones through evolutionary pressures unique to extreme environments, where sustained darkness, immense pressure, and low nutrient availability demand adaptations unheard of in typical marine settings. And if such lineages exist, their structures may appear anomalous when examined through frameworks designed around surface-dwelling or midwater ecosystems, and the discovery of the tooth thus reopens long-standing questions regarding the completeness of the fossil record, especially for deep-sea organisms, as most fossils originate from shallow marine or terrestrial sediments, leaving vast evolutionary intervals undocumented and allowing for the possibility that entire clades evolved and vanished within deep ocean trenches without leaving traditional fossil traces. And as investigations proceed, researchers consider the implications of discovering a biological structure of such size without corresponding evidence of the organism's soft tissue skeletal remains or additional teeth, and this absence suggests that the organism may possess a morphology not reliant on bone or cartilage, or that its skeletal structure may be composed of materials prone to rapid dissolution under marine conditions, leaving only highly mineralized components like the tooth capable of long-term preservation. And this aligns with hypotheses that deep ocean organisms may incorporate mineral reinforcement into tissue structures, enabling survival under extreme pressure, and that such reinforcement may resist fossilization processes or degrade entirely upon exposure to shallower chemical environments, thereby preventing detection in the fossil record. And as these considerations accumulate, the discovery of the tooth begins reshaping assumptions about the limits of terrestrial biochemistry, pushing researchers to consider models in which life can self-integrate inorganic components at high degrees into its biological architecture, forming composite organisms whose structures cannot be classified neatly within traditional taxonomic boundaries and in parallel with biological speculation. Geologists and physicists evaluate whether the object's discovery aligns with recent anomalies detected in the region's electromagnetic and hydrodynamic patterns, and they discover that in the days following the density inversion event, several ocean-based observatories recorded unusual pressure waves consistent with the passage of a large moving boundary or displacement field, though lacking clear signatures of biological locomotion, implying that if an organism associated with the tooth exists, it may employ movement methods not reliant on muscular propulsion or fin-based mechanics, but instead on hydrodynamic manipulation or boundary-induced displacement, akin to rare deep ocean energy propagation events, previously recorded but never attributed to biological entities. And if such coupling between biological organisms and field propagation exists, it would revolutionize the understanding of locomotion in extreme environments and open new possibilities regarding how large unidentified species may traverse deep ocean regions without leaving turbulence or thermal signatures detectable by current instruments. And these Considerations push scientists to explore whether the tooth could be part of a species capable of interacting with deep ocean energy structures in a way that camouflages its presence within the ambient field, thus explaining why no sightings, no skeletal remains, and no acoustic signatures have ever been documented, despite the immense size implied by the object. And the potential ecological implications of such a species become profound as researchers analyze how an organism capable of integrating mineral and energy field interactions might influence deep-sea ecosystems, potentially serving as an apex predator or scavenger, with feeding strategies shaped not by conventional food chains, but by direct exploitation of mineral, chemical, or energy gradients within the environment. And such an organism could remain undetectable in behavioral surveys due to its alignment with non-visual, non-acoustic modes of existence, rendering current detection tools insufficient for tracking it. And, as scientific discussions intensify, researchers develop new sensory platforms designed to detect refractive disturbances and electromagnetic fluctuations that might accompany such organisms. And initial small-scale tests reveal faint anomalies in deep ocean basins, matching neither geological nor known biological activity, supporting the idea that unknown forms of life or energy structures may inhabit deep marine territories beyond the reach of conventional observation. And these findings suggest that the human-sized tooth may be the first tangible evidence of such entities, and that its discovery signals the beginning of a new scientific frontier requiring redefinition of what constitutes a biological organism and what environmental conditions permit life and structure formation. And through these emerging paradigms, the tooth transforms from an isolated mystery into a doorway, revealing that Earth's deep ocean remains a vast repository of unknown processes, unknown organisms, and unknown interactions between matter, energy, and biology, waiting to be uncovered by instruments and theories still evolving to meet the challenge of deciphering a world existing far beyond human reach and comprehension. As the investigation advances and more interdisciplinary teams contribute to the analysis of the human-sized tooth-like structure, the scientific narrative begins shifting away from attempts to classify the object within existing biological frameworks and toward constructing entirely new conceptual models capable of explaining its unprecedented properties. And these new models emphasize the possibility that deep ocean environments may host conditions under which matter and energy interact to produce composite structures that occupy a space between biology, geology, and physics, challenging long-held distinctions used to categorize natural phenomena. And these models arise from the growing realization that the tooth exhibits characteristics inconsistent with singular disciplinary explanations, revealing instead a convergence of processes that span mineral accretion, biological morphology, energy field modulation, and high-pressure chemistry, producing a structure that defies categorization within existing taxonomic or geological templates. And one of the emerging frameworks proposes that deep ocean trenches may operate as dynamic reactors where organic remnants, mineral ion gradients, and tectonic energy pulses interact in ways that periodically generate hybridized structures capable of retaining biological form while undergoing extensive mineral reinforcement, resulting in a class of objects neither fully alive nor fully fossilized but occupying a transitional state, governed by environmental conditions far removed from those typically observed on the surface. And within this framework, the tooth may represent a morphologically intact relic from an organism whose tissues were gradually replaced or reinforced by minerals accumulating in response to oscillating pressure and electromagnetic gradients, preserving the structure but altering composition in a process distinct from classical fossilization, which occurs after death rather than during an organism's lifespan. And this leads researchers to speculate whether the organism associated with the tooth may have possessed biological pathways enabling the incorporation of inorganic materials into its structural components. While still alive, perhaps as an adaptation to extreme pressure environments where mineral reinforcement provides greater durability than organic tissues alone, and such pathways would represent an entirely new branch of biochemistry incorporating elements of biomineralization observed in organisms like mollusks and corals, yet far surpassing known limits, by integrating minerals into load-bearing components capable of functioning under intense mechanical stress. And this possibility gains support when scientists identify unusual alignment patterns within the crystalline deposits, coating the internal cavities of the tooth, showing arrangements that appear to follow a biological template rather than random geological deposition, suggesting that mineral growth may have occurred in tandem with organic processes, guided or influenced by the organism's internal biochemical or electromagnetic fields, and if such organisms exist, their biology may rely on mechanisms that exploit the pressure-dependent behavior of minerals, allowing them to grow structures that merge organic and inorganic components in a synergistic manner, effectively blurring the line between biological tissue and geological formation. And if the tooth represents such a hybrid biological structure, it provides unprecedented insight into how life might evolve in extreme environments, where pressure, temperature, chemical gradients differ so drastically from surface ecosystems that entirely new rules of biological design become possible. And as these models develop, researchers begin examining the potential ecological role of an organism capable of producing such a tooth, focusing on the feeding mechanisms implied by its curvature, density, and internal structure, and traditional models of predation and feeding are inadequate because the density of the tooth suggests structural reinforcement suited for forces far beyond those exerted by conventional biting or crushing motions, and the lack of wear marks or abrasion patterns on the enamel indicates that the structure may not have been used for direct mechanical interaction with prey, suggesting alternative functions such as pressure modulation, substrate penetration, or interaction with energy fields within the environment, and theoretical models propose that the tooth could have served as a resonant interface, capable of focusing or absorbing environmental energy, allowing the organism to feed not through conventional means, but through extraction of energy or nutrients from mineral-rich sediments or chemical gradients in a manner analogous to chemosynthetic organisms, but scaled to dimensions far exceeding those of known species. And if the tooth served as a resonant interface, this may explain the unusual scoring patterns identified on the exterior surface, which resemble the signatures of vibrational wear rather than friction, suggesting that the object may have been exposed to oscillating fields capable of shaping its surface over long periods. And these oscillations may have originated from the organism itself or from environmental interactions within regions of intense tectonic activity, where periodic vibrations generated by deep mantle processes propagate upward into the hydrosphere and shape biological structures in ways never observed in shallower environments. And supporting this idea, researchers find that the periodicity of scoring patterns EGNs with low-frequency wave signatures detected in certain deep ocean trenches known for high tectonic sensitivity, suggesting that the organism may have evolved in an environment where seismic or geomagnetic oscillations influenced not only behavior but biological structure itself. And this emerging theory suggests that the deep ocean may host environments where energy, rather than food availability, becomes the dominant selective pressure, leading organisms to develop adaptations that allow them to harness environmental vibrations, electromagnetic fields, or mineral gradients to sustain biological processes traditionally reliant on chemical energy. And such adaptations could lead to the evolution of structures like the tooth, which serve not as tools for capturing prey, but as biological interfaces for interacting with energy flows within the environment. effectively allowing the organism to feed on phenomena inaccessible to surface dwelling life forms. And as this radical interpretation gains traction, scientists continue analyzing the chemical composition of the tooth's enamel layer, discovering that it contains unusual ratios of trace elements in patterns consistent with controlled mineral uptake rather than random deposition, implying that the organism may have selectively integrated minerals into its structural matrix through metabolic pathways adapted for high-pressure environments. And these pathways would require complex biochemical mechanisms capable of regulating mineral ionization states, binding crystalline components to organic tissue, and reinforcing structural integrity in ways unknown to surface organisms. And this raises the question of whether such deep-sea organisms might possess alternative forms of metabolism that integrate inorganic energy sources, possibly through electrochemical processes analogous to those utilized by chemosynthetic bacteria, but far more advanced and capable of supporting macroscopic life at scales implied by the tooth's size and density. And if such creatures exist, their biology could represent an entirely separate evolutionary strategy. 1. Not reliant on oxygen-driven metabolism or photosynthetic food chains, but instead dependent on energy extraction from geochemical gradients or field interactions, effectively forming an ecological domain parallel. 2. But distinct from the conventional biosphere. And this possibility prompts scientists to reconsider whether life in extreme environments might be far more diverse and structurally complex than previously imagined, existing across multiple tiers of biochemical design, each shaped by the specific constraints and opportunities present within their respective environmental niches. And as the investigation progresses, geophysical teams report newly collected data from the region where the tooth washed ashore, revealing a series of unusual pressure waves recorded days before the discovery, resembling those generated by large moving objects, yet lacking turbulence, gradients expected from biological locomotion, implying that the movement may have been facilitated by hydrodynamic displacement rather than fin or muscular propulsion. And this discovery fuels speculation that the organism associated with the tooth may possess the ability to interact with deep ocean density fields, enabling it to move through water without generating wake, similar to certain theoretical boundary propagation phenomena observed in the deep ocean. And if such an organism existed, its movement would be nearly undetectable by traditional sonar systems, explaining why no trace of it has ever been recorded, despite the enormous size implied by the tooth. And these findings suggest that the first 5 tooth may belong not to an extinct species, but to a living organism that remains elusive due to its ability to manipulate its environment in ways that conceal its presence from standard detection technologies. And as new data accumulates, researchers begin constructing speculative models of how the organism's body may have been structured around mineralized components, allowing it to withstand extreme pressure while maintaining mobility, potentially through flexible joints. Composed of semi-crystalline elements capable of distributing stress across the body in a manner analogous to load balancing in geological structures, rather than through muscle and cartilage alone. And this proposed biomechanical percent architecture would enable the organism to operate efficiently at depths far beyond the limits of conventional marine life, and could explain how its tooth-like structures attain such density without compromise to functional mechanics. As the investigation reaches deeper theoretical territory, scientists recognize that understanding the tooth's origin requires not only analysis of biological and geological questions, but also the exploration of fundamental physical principles governing matter under extreme pressure and electromagnetic influence, prompting physicists to collaborate closely with biologists to model how organic crystalline hybrid materials behave under deep ocean conditions. And these collaborations yield new insights into the possible existence of metastable biological states where matter assumes configurations not possible under surface conditions, enabling the preservation or functional use of structures like the tooth. and this leads to the creation of new theoretical categories describing transitional materials existing between organic and inorganic states, and these categories become crucial to interpreting the tooth as a product of natural processes rather than an outlier. And as this conceptual expansion continues, researchers consider the broader implications of such discoveries for understanding the origins, evolution, diversity of life on Earth, proposing that extreme environments may foster evolutionary pathways entirely invisible to surface-based perspectives, and that the tooth represents the first physical evidence supporting this hypothesis, and the emergence of these ideas marks a turning point in the scientific narrative, signaling that the discovery is not merely an anomaly to be classified, but a gateway to a deeper recognition of the vast, unexplored potential of Earth's most remote environments where biological, geological, and physical systems may converge to produce phenomena that redefine the boundaries of life, material science, and planetary dynamics. And through this lens, the human-sized tooth-like structure becomes not an isolated artifact, but the first observed fragment of a hidden world whose full extent and significance remain to be uncovered. As the investigation into the human-sized tooth-like structure deepens, scientists begin to confront the possibility that the object represents more than an isolated biological artifact and instead serves as a tangible manifestation of an unrecognized domain of deep ocean processes, shaped by pressures, chemical gradients, and electromagnetic dynamics, far beyond the scope of conventional knowledge. And this shift in perspective arises from a growing accumulation of anomalous data, including irregular isotopic ratios, atypical crystalline structures, evidence of prolonged electromagnetic field exposure, and morphological features inconsistent with any traditional evolutionary lineage, suggesting the existence of a 12 biological or quasi-biological system operating under principles not represented in existing frameworks of marine science. And, as researchers integrate findings from biology, geology, physics, and materials science, a new conceptual landscape begins to form in which life or life-adjacent systems may exploit environmental parameters so extreme that their physical adaptations diverge drastically from familiar organic forms, producing structural hybrids that behave in ways analogous to biological components yet possess mineralogical and energetic characteristics that challenge the fundamental distinction between living tissue and geological matter. And within this conceptual landscape, the tooth becomes a prototype example illustrating how environmental pressures at abyssal depths could drive the emergence of organisms whose biology is inseparable from the geophysical environment in which they evolved, incorporating minerals, electromagnetic fields, and pressure-modulated chemistry directly into their anatomical architecture, thereby allowing for the development of structures exhibiting extraordinary strength, density, and resilience not achievable through organic biochemistry alone, and this possibility is reinforced by microanalytical studies revealing that the tooth's mineral composition aligns with patterns typically associated with geothermally influenced environments, featuring fluctuating electric charge densities that promote stable crystalline growth. Yet the geometry of these crystalline formations conforms to a biological template, indicating that they formed under guidance from an underlying organic structure rather than through random deposition. And this duality leads researchers to propose that the organism associated with the tooth may have possessed a biological scaffold onto which environment-dependent minerals accreted over time, producing a living hybrid structure in a continuous interplay between biological metabolism and environmental chemistry. And in this scenario, the deep ocean itself becomes a key participant in the organism's development, shaping its morphology through mineral availability, electromagnetic drift, and pressure-induced phase behavior, resulting in structures that appear geological in composition but biological in form and function. And as this idea EA gains traction. Scientists begin to speculate that deep-sea species may have evolved metabolic pathways capable of directing mineral growth along predetermined biomolecular gradients, allowing them to reinforce their anatomy with geologically derived materials to withstand extreme environmental stresses and potentially interact with deep ocean energy fields in ways not accessible to organic tissue alone. And these metabolic pathways would represent a radically different evolutionary strategy. 1. Relying on the integration of biological and inorganic matter in a manner more reminiscent of natural composite engineering than familiar cellular growth processes. And this could explain why the tooth exhibits a level of hardness, density, and structural coherence surpassing even that of known fossilized remains, despite lacking the brittleness characteristic of ancient mineral replacements, and appearing instead functionally robust as, though designed to operate under intense mechanical or energetic loads. And further supporting this interpretation, researchers identify subtle internal waveguide patterns within the tooth's crystalline framework, suggesting that it may have been capable not only of withstanding mechanical forces, but also of conducting or modulating environmental vibrations or electromagnetic currents. And this opens the possibility that the tooth functioned not merely as a feeding structure, but as a specialized organ for sensing, interacting with, or influencing energy fields within the deep ocean environment, perhaps enabling the organism to navigate, locate resources, or commune. Through mechanisms not based on sound, light, or chemical signaling, but through field interaction, analogous to yet far more advanced than the electrosensory systems seen in certain modern fish species, and the internal architecture of the tooth supports this hypothesis, showing organized channels that do not correspond to vascular structures, but instead reflect patterns consistent with directed energy flow modulation, suggesting the presence of a biologically integrated crystalline circuit capable of transmitting field-based information or stored charge across the organism's anatomy. And if this interpretation holds, the organism associated with the tooth may have been part of a class of deep-sea life forms, adapted to exploit energy gradients in their environment in ways approaching a biological equivalent of mineral-based circuitry, allowing them to operate within the extreme constraints of deep ocean physics by interacting directly with the geophysical forces present in their habitat. And this would represent not merely an evolutionary adaptation, but an entire alternative biological paradigm, shaped by constant exposure to extreme pressure, high mineral concentrations, and fluctuating electromagnetic fields, enabling organisms to merge biological and physical processes into functional systems fundamentally different from surface-based life. And as the magnitude of these implications becomes apparent, research teams expand surveys across the region where the tooth emerged, deploying high-resolution magnetometers, density scanners, and submersible probes to detect additional anomalies that may indicate the presence of similar structures or living organisms possessing comparable adaptations. And these surveys soon uncover irregular magnetic flux patterns arranged along linear pathways on the seafloor, suggesting zones where minerals may have been reorganized by interactions with large moving entities, exhibiting field modulation capabilities similar to those hypothesized for the organism. And though no direct biological signatures are detected, the spatial distribution of these anomalies implies the periodic presence of a large mobile agent capable of interacting with the environment in ways consistent with the theoretical models of field-based locomotion. And this finding revitalizes the people-agent question of whether the organism associated with the tooth might still exist deep within the oceanic trenches where environmental conditions remain suitable for its survival and where traditional detection tools lack the sensitivity to identify its movements due to its apparent ability to manipulate density gradients and reduce turbulence through field-aligned propulsion mechanisms. And if such an organism exists, it would present a form of life fundamentally undetectable by conventional acoustic or optical sensors, requiring the development of specialized detection systems designed to identify field modulation rather than physical motion. And as field-based detection arrays are deployed, researchers begin to observe faint periodic signatures resembling the harmonic tremors recorded during the density inversion event that preceded the tooth's arrival. And these signatures occur at depths exceeding the capabilities of most modern submersibles, and display rhythmic patterns inconsistent with tectonic processes, suggesting that they may arise from the movement or activity of large, unidentified organisms interacting with deep ocean electromagnetic fields. And these findings prompt further speculation regarding the ecological role of such organisms, whose immense mineralized structures and ability to harness environmental energy imply a position within the deep ocean ecosystem, not defined by predation or competition in the traditional sense, but by interactions with geophysical processes that may influence mineral cycling, chemical gradients, and energy distribution within their habitat. And if these organisms serve as intermediaries between geological and biological systems, they may function as key regulators, balancing pressure distributions, mineral flux, and energy gradients across large oceanic regions, operating through mechanisms that remain invisible without field-based sensors. And this raises profound questions about the nature of ecosystems in extreme environments where energy, rather than biomass, may be the primary driver of biological organization, and where organisms may evolve structures like the tooth, not for consuming prey, but for integrating environmental forces into their metabolic or locomotive strategies. And these considerations lead to the development of a new theoretical framework proposing that deep ocean life operates along a continuum between biological organisms and energy field structures, with some species evolving to incorporate increasing ounce of inorganic material and field interaction into their biology until their existence begins to resemble a quasi-physical phenomenon rather than a traditional organism. And within this framework, the tooth becomes evidence of a species, occupying a position near the boundary of biological and geophysical processes, evolving adaptations that permit it to exist within an extreme environment by adopting characteristics normally associated with geological matter, such as crystalline stability, high density, and electromagnetic interaction. And as the significance of this interpretation becomes clear, paleobiologists revisit the fossil record seeking patterns that might indicate past instances of similar, hybridized organisms. And while direct evidence is absent, some fossil sequences reveal unexplained discontinuities involving species adapted to deep marine environments disappearing abruptly without transitional forms, suggesting possibility that some ancient organisms may have undergone evolutionary divergence into deep ocean zones where their biology transformed beyond recognition and left no conventional fossils behind. And the discovery of the tooth reopens the question of how much biodiversity remains hidden in Earth's deepest isolation zones, where extreme environmental pressures may foster biological innovation unconstrained by evolutionary rules that govern shallow ocean and terrestrial ecosystems. And this drives funding toward new missions, deploying experimental submersibles capable of exploring previously unreachable depths and detecting field-based movement patterns and HESI missions record increasingly detailed electromagnetic and density anomalies, suggesting that the region may indeed host a population of large organisms exhibiting behaviors consistent with field-aligned mobility, though their presence remains unconfirmed due to the lack of visual or acoustic signatures. And as data accumulates, it becomes evident that the tooth-like structure is not an isolated artifact, but part of a broader pattern indicating the existence of an ecosystem shaped by forces fundamentally different from those known in the photic or midwater zones. And the implications of this realization extend beyond marine biology, challenging assumptions about the diversity of life on Earth, the adaptability of biological systems, and the potential for organisms to exploit physical forces outside the realm of conventional metabolism and locomotion. And through this expanding perspective, the tooth becomes the first known fragment of an entire hidden biosphere, one that may operate at the threshold between life and geology, using the deep ocean environment as both habitat and metabolic substrate, and existing in near total invisibility to human detection, until rare events such as density inversions or tectonic shifts bring their structural remains into shallow water where they can be recovered and studied. And as research continues, the scientific community acknowledges that the discovery represents more than evidence of an unidentified species. It signifies a paradigm shift, revealing that the planet's deepest environments may harbor forms of life or life-aligned systems, far more complex and physically integrated with their surroundings than previously imagined, and that the boundaries of biology must expand to accommodate new categories of existence, shaped not solely by organic evolution, but by the interplay of matter, energy, and extreme environmental processes. And through this lens, the human-sized tooth-like structure stands as the first definitive physical clue to a vast unseen domain of Earth's biosphere awaiting exploration. As the scientific investigation progresses and the implications of the human-sized tooth-like artifact grow increasingly profound, researchers begin constructing integrative theoretical models to reconcile the extensive body of data gathered across biological, geological, and physical domains. And these models converge on the realization that deep ocean ecosystems may operate according to principles starkly different from those governing life in shallow waters, with environmental factors such as pressure, mineral saturation, electromagnetic drift, and thermal variability, producing selection pressures that drive biological adaptation into realms previously considered impossible. And within this conceptual shift, tooth-like structure becomes not merely an anomaly, but the first recognizable morphological signal of an entire class of organisms whose existence may depend upon the deep ocean's unique capacity to blend organic processes with inorganic environmental forces, creating a gradient of biological states that extend far beyond the boundaries observed in surface life. And evidence from microstructural analysis points toward the presence of controlled mineral integration pathways within the organism's anatomy, suggesting that biological functions in such species might involve symbiotic or even intrinsic interactions with ambient mineral fields, enabling structural reinforcement, metabolic support, or energy extraction mechanisms fundamentally distinct from conventional aerobic or chemosynthetic strategies. And this potential metabolic divergence arises from the extreme scarcity of traditional energy sources at abyssal depths, necessitating alternative pathways for sustaining life, and leading to the hypothesis that some deep ocean organisms may exploit geophysical energy sources, such as ambient electromagnetic fluctuations, tectonic stress, gradients, or pressure-induced phase transitions in seawater, allowing them to convert environmental forces directly into biological energy, in a process analogous to, but far more complex than the energy harvesting mechanisms seen in certain extremophilic bacteria inhabiting hydrothermal vents. And if such energy conversion pathways exist, they could support organisms of significant size without reliance on traditional food chains, explaining why no known trophic structures correspond to the dimensions implied by the tooth, and supporting the idea that these creatures may occupy an ecological niche defined not by predation or competition, but by direct interaction with non-biological environmental forces and Further inspection of the crystalline patterns within the tooth provides additional support for this hypothesis, as researchers identify subtle periodic banding within mineral infill struct. Ewers, matching the oscillation frequencies of ambient electromagnetic waves recorded in the trench region, before and after tectonic activity, indicating that the organism may have interacted with environmental fields in a sustained and biologically functional manner. And this discovery leads to the speculative yet increasingly plausible idea that the tooth may have served as a resonant energy interface, enabling the organism to detect, harness, or stabilize electromagnetic fluctuations within its habitat. And if so, the structure could have played a role analogous to a sensory organ metabolic regulator or propulsion enhancer, depending on its function within the organism's anatomy. And this concept gains further support from density models indicating that the tooth's mass distribution is optimized not for mechanical bite force, but for vibrational stability, implying that it may have been designed to resonate harmonically within a specific frequency range, enabling the organism to amplify or absorb environmental vibrations in a controlled manner. And such functionality could facilitate communication across long distances, navigation through complex density fields, or the detection of seismic or electromagnetic disturbances far beyond the capabilities of conventional sensory systems. And these possibilities expand the scientific conversation into the realms of biophysics and geophysical biology, suggesting that deep ocean organisms may have evolved to adapt not only to their chemical and physical environment, but also to the dynamic forces shaping the ocean floor, including tectonic shifts, electromagnetic pulses, and mineral flux gradients, creating a form of life intrinsically tuned to the planet's energy systems. And as theoretical models mature, researchers begin reinterpreting previously collected anomalous readings from deep ocean monitoring stations, discovering that many unexplained electromagnetic fluctuations, pressure spikes, and acoustic distortions recorded over past decades align with the patterns expected from large organisms interacting with environmental fields in ways consistent with the hypothesized mechanisms inferred from the tooth's structure. And this reanalysis suggests that encounters with such organisms may have occurred numerous times in the past, but were never recognized as biological phenomena due to their non-traditional signatures, lacking acoustic turbulence, optical reflectivity, or thermal emission, and instead presenting as brief fluctuations in density or electromagnetic readings, indistinguishable at the time from environmental noise or instrument artifacts. And with this realization, researchers begin reconstructing a preliminary behavioral framework for the hypothesized species, suggesting that its movement may rely on manipulating local density gradients or field alignments rather than physical propulsion, allowing it to glide through water with minimal disturbance and thereby avoiding detection by standard sonar systems. And if such movement mechanisms exist, they would confer extraordinary advantages, enabling the organism to navigate through deep ocean landscapes with unparalleled efficiency while remaining nearly invisible to predators, competitors, and scientific observers alike. And the tooth's presence on shore indicates that despite such extraordinary adaptations, these organisms, or their relics, may occasionally intersect with Earth's surface environments under rare environmental conditions such as density inversions, tectonic uplift events, or strong underwater currents, capable of transporting deep-sea materials upward and outward across significant vertical distances. And this interaction raises questions about whether such organisms ever migrate intentionally towards shallower waters, or if their structures occasionally reach the surface only as a result of geological events that dislodge them from their isolated environments. And further isotopic analysis suggests that the tooth may have been exposed to a regime of fluctuating thermal conditions not present in stable deep-sea habitats, indicating that it may have resided near a dynamic boundary where geothermal processes periodically altered local temperature gradients. And this raises the possibility that the organism associated with the tooth may inhabit regions near deep ocean fracture zones or hydrothermal conduits, where interactions between tectonic stress and mineral-rich fluids create environments capable of supporting energy-based biological systems. And these environments would provide both the mineral resources required for structural reinforcement and the electromagnetic or vibrational stimuli necessary for sustaining specialized biological processes proposed in theoretical models. And this hypothesis gains additional credibility when researchers identify rare isotopic signatures within the enamel-like surface consistent with exposure to high-pressure fluid jets characteristic of hydrothermal plume environments, suggesting that the organism may have used such plumes as navigational markers or energy sources. And this association connects the tooth to a broader ecosystem, rooted not in organic nutrient flow, but in the flux of minerals and energy emanating from Earth's crust. And as the conceptual framework broadens, the discovery begins to resonate within evolutionary biology, prompting reconsideration of how life may have originated on Earth, and whether early organisms may have arisen in deep ocean environments shaped by mineral and energy gradients rather than in nutrient-rich, shallow pools, as traditionally theorized. And if deep ocean species today exhibit characteristics of mineral-integrated biology, it may hint that ancient life forms possessed similar adaptations, or that divergent evolutionary branches formed independently within extreme environments, leading to biological systems fundamentally different from those dominating the modern biosphere. And this revelation forces a re-examination of the fossil record, which overwhelmingly reflects life from shallow marine or terrestrial environments, leaving deep-sea lineages virtually undocumented due to the scarcity of fossilization processes at extreme depths and the likelihood that mineral-integrated biological structures behave differently under geological timescales, either dissolving completely or becoming indistinguishable from geological formations, and thus the absence of evidence for such organisms in the fossil record may not reflect their absence in Earth's history, but rather the incompatibility of their preservation mechanisms with typical sedimentary processes. And, as researchers contemplate this possibility, they begin exploring whether the tooth itself represents an evolutionary relic from an ancient lineage or a modern representative of a continuously evolving deep ocean species. And initial radiometric assessments prove inconclusive as the mineral integration processes obscure traditional dating methods, though certain isotopic markers suggest exposure to environmental conditions fluctuating over thousands rather than millions of years, implying that the structure may be far more recent than its crystalline density suggests. And this raises the provocative possibility that the organism remains extant and that the tooth was shed or broken off during normal biological processes, rather than being the remnant of a long-extinct species. And such a possibility fundamentally alters the direction of research, prompting national and international scientific agencies to invest in deep ocean expeditions equipped with advanced energy field sensors in hopes of detecting similar structures or even capturing direct evidence of the organism itself. And early sensor deployments begin detecting periodic low-frequency disturbances in regions matching the predicted environmental parameters for such pride species, and these disturbances differ from geological noise as they display coherent patterns and directional movement, suggesting the presence of large mobile entities operating within boundary layers where pressure, density, and electromagnetic fields intersect in complex ways. And though no visual evidence has yet been obtained, the increasing consistency of these detections across multiple platforms enhances confidence in the hypothesis that the tooth belongs to a species capable of interacting with its environment through mechanisms entirely unrepresented in known biological systems. And this awareness expands scientific dialogue beyond the confidence immediate mystery of the tooth. toward broader questions about the nature of life in extreme environments and the possibility that multiple biological paradigms coexist on Earth, each shaped by unique evolutionary pressures and environmental constraints. And as this broader perspective takes hold, the discovery begins to influence other scientific domains, including astrobiology, where researchers consider how similar mineral-integrated biological systems could arise on planets. With extreme atmospheric pressure, limited sunlight, and abundant geophysical activity, providing a model for life that does not rely on photosynthesis or organic nutrient webs, but instead harnesses environmental energy fields as a primary metabolic source. And these insights transform the tooth from a mysterious artifact into a cornerstone for hypothetical models of extraterrestrial biology, prompting speculation that organisms capable of integrating biological and mineral structures may exist on ocean worlds such as Europa, Enceladus, or exoplanets, with extreme environments paralleling Earth's deep ocean trenches. And through this interdisciplinary expansion, the significance of the tooth becomes global, reflecting not merely a biological anomaly, but a profound demonstration that life's architecture may be vastly more flexible than previously imagined, capable of adapting to and exploiting environmental conditions previously deemed inhospitable or irrelevant to living systems. And in this light, the tooth serves as a crucial anchor point, a piece of physical evidence forcing a re-evaluation of the principles governing biology, ecology, and evolution across planetary environments. And as the investigation enters its next phase, researchers recognize that understanding the organism behind the tooth will require a new generation of tools capable of detecting non-traditional biological signatures, capturing data from beyond the limits of current pressure tolerance, and analyzing structures that operate within the intersection of physics, biology, and geoscience. And this recognition marks the beginning of a new era in deep ocean exploration, driven by the realization that Earth's most inaccessible environments may harbor organisms representing forms of life, or life-adjacent systems that bridge the gap between matter and energy. Biology and geology and organic and inorganic evolution pushing the boundaries of scientific comprehension toward a future where the unseen depths reveal entirely new dimensions of what life can be. As scientific exploration continues and deep ocean research teams gather increasingly detailed data surrounding the discovery of the human-sized tooth-like structure, new theoretical frameworks begin to shape the global discourse, transforming the artifact from a biological curiosity into a key component in understanding a potential class of organisms adapted to extreme geophysical environments. And as these frameworks evolve, researchers broaden their focus to include not only the composition and morphology of the tooth, but also the dynamic environmental conditions that could enable the formation, survival, and evolution of organisms possessing such extraordinary structural adaptations. And one of the central emerging concepts posits that the deep ocean may serve as a natural laboratory where biological matter interacts continuously with geophysical forces, generating hybrid structures that bridge organic and inorganic domains and operate under principles not represented in conventional biological systems. And this hypothesis draws further validation from detailed mineralogical mapping, which reveals that the tooth's internal microstructures align closely with fields generated by tectonic stress distortions, suggesting long-term exposure to a fluctuating electromagnetic environment. And such an environment could provide the energetic foundation necessary to sustain metabolic processes in organisms residing at extreme depths where sunlight is absent and chemical nutrients are scarce. And this leads scientists to postulate that some deep ocean species may have evolved the ability to convert ambient geophysical energy into biologically programmed, useful forms in a process analogous to but profoundly distinct from chemosynthesis, enabling organisms to incorporate mineral matrices into their physical structure and POA. potentially use them to harvest energy directly from pressure differentials, tectonic fluctuations, and electromagnetic fields. And as these ideas gain traction, interdisciplinary teams construct theoretical models describing how such energy harvesting mechanisms might function in practice, proposing that mineral-integrated biological tissues could serve as natural semiconductors, piezoelectric elements, or vibrational resonators, converting environmental, mechanical, electromagnetic energy into biochemical signaling or metabolic power. And within this context, the tooth's tremendous density, its organized crystalline patterns, and its resonant banding become interpretable not as anomalies, but as adaptations, equipping the organism with capabilities far beyond those of conventional marine species, enabling it to navigate extreme environments, withstand immense pressure, and potentially manipulate surrounding energy fields as part of its ecological strategy. And to test these possibilities, researchers begin simulating deep ocean field interactions using high-pressure chambers, mineral-infused saline, and electromagnetic oscillators, attempting to replicate conditions under ISS. Which biological tissues could acquire crystalline reinforcement and resonate in specific frequencies, and though these simulations fall short of reproducing the complexity observed in the tooth, they reveal that certain organic compounds can indeed form hybrid crystalline matrices under sustained pressure and electrical influence, supporting the hypothesis that deep-sea organisms may evolve along pathways integrating biology with physics in unprecedented ways. And this insight leads scientists to consider whether other deep ocean anomalies previously dismissed as geological phenomena might instead reflect biological interactions with energy fields such as unexplained pressure ripples, rhythmic magnetic fluctuations, and density distortion waves recorded intermittently by autonomous submersibles in various trench systems. And by re-examining these historical anomalies through the lens of mineral integrated biology, researchers began identifying patterns suggesting that some disturbances exhibit characteristics inconsistent with simple geophysical processes, including timing, periodicity, and directional propagation that imply the sightings of Cetic system Cermity-Prost, possible presence of large moving entities capable of influencing density and electromagnetic fields as they traverse their environment. And this interpretation aligns with predictions derived from computational models of organisms possessing mineral resonant structures like the tooth, which suggests that such creatures could move through the water by subtly modifying surrounding density gradients, allowing propulsion without turbulence, and generating signatures not readily detectable by sonar or optical sensors. And this realization motivates the development of new detection systems designed to identify refractive distortions, magnetic drift anomalies, and micro-resonance waves that may indicate the presence of such organisms. And early deployments of these next-generation sensors yield promising results, capturing sequences of low-amplitude oscillations consistent with field-based movement, patterns predicted by theoretical models. And though these readings stop short of confirming biological origin, they provide compelling evidence that unknown phenomena operating within deep ocean basins may indeed involve large structures, capable of interacting with their environment in complex ways, supporting the possibility that mineral-integrated organisms exist and remain active in Earth's most inaccessible regions. And as attention turns back to the tooth, researchers analyze its structural integrity to infer potential ecological roles its originating organism may have fulfilled, and density measurements suggest that the tooth could withstand forces many times greater than those necessary for biting or tearing biological tissue, implying that it may have been adapted for interacting with dense mineral formations or high-pressure energy fluxes rather than for consuming prey. And this leads scientists to explore whether the organism may have participated in sediment restructuring processes, mineral extraction behaviors, or interactions with hydrothermal vent systems, where energy-rich fluids and mineral deposits form dynamic landscapes requiring specialized adaptations for navigation and exploitation. And if such creatures interact with mineral systems at depth, they may influence geological processes, including sediment distribution, mineral transport, and even the stability of hydrothermal structures, making problems nude them not merely consumers within an ecological system, but active participants in shaping their environment through the exchange of matter and energy. And these possibilities compel geologists to incorporate biological variables into models of deep ocean geological behavior, suggesting that living organisms may play a role in redistributing minerals and energy across tectonic boundaries in ways previously overlooked. Due to the assumption that large organisms cannot survive under such extreme conditions, and as these insights converge, they fundamentally alter scientific understanding of deep-sea ecology, portraying it not as a barren abyss, but as a complex dynamic system, shaped not only by geological and chemical forces, but by biological entities capable of integrating with and influencing these forces at fundamental levels. And this paradigm shift prompts scientists to consider how widespread such mineral-integrated organisms might be, whether they represent a rare specialization confined to isolated trenches or a pervasive yet undetected class of life operating in deep ocean environments worldwide and complex. Modeling suggests that if such organisms exist, they may inhabit regions characterized by steep mineral gradients, high tectonic activity, and persistent electromagnetic flux, providing the necessary conditions for energy harvesting, structural mineralization, and these regions align closely with areas where unexplained anomalies have been observed historically, including deep trenches, volcanic arcs, and mid-ocean ridges, implying that the presence of such organisms may be more geographically widespread than initially assumed. And as research continues, environmental geneticists attempt to detect potential traces of biological material associated with the tooth's origin. But traditional DNA extraction methods fail to produce viable sequences due to extensive mineral integration, which has replaced organic molecules at near total saturation levels, leaving no recoverable genetic information. And this reinforces the realization that such organisms may possess fundamentally different biochemical systems, rendering conventional genetic tools insufficient for identifying or characterizing their biology, and suggesting the need for new approaches to detecting biological signatures, perhaps focusing on inorganic molecular patterns, isotopic anomalies, or energy-based processes, rather than organic genetic markers. And this absence of DNA also challenges assumptions about biological continuity, raising the possibility that mineral-integrated organisms may not rely on nucleic acid-based heredity, or that their genetic systems may be stabilized or obscured by mineral matrices under extreme pressure, requiring entirely new investigative methodologies to decode. And these realizations spark intense debate within the scientific community, as some researchers argue that the tooth represents evidence of a completely parallel evolutionary system, operating independently of conventional life, while others suggest that it may reflect an advanced form of biomineralization evolved through prolonged isolation within extreme environments, demonstrating the remarkable plasticity of biological systems when exposed to unconventional evolutionary pressures. And in the midst of this debate, new environmental readings from the deep ocean region, where the tooth likely originated, reveal persistent low-frequency oscillations of unknown origin, exhibiting periodicity that does not match geological activity patterns, and instead suggests rhythmic biological behavior on a massive scale, consistent with coordinated movement or signaling among large organisms. And though the source of these oscillations remains unidentified, their repeated detection across multiple sensor arrays lends further credence to the hypothesis that the organism behind the tooth may still exist deep within the ocean and may communicate or navigate using field interactions rather than sound or light. And these findings inspire a new generation of deep exploration missions equipped with field-reactive submersibles, capable of operating at depths where traditional equipment fails, allowing scientists to pursue direct observation of such organisms despite the extreme environmental conditions. And though these missions have yet to capture definitive, quote, visual documentation, they have recorded increasingly pronounced electromagnetic disturbances consistent with large moving bodies interacting with the surrounding medium using mechanisms predicted by mineral-integrated biological models, and this growing evidence supports the emerging view that Earth's deep ocean may harbor a vast and previously invisible biosphere composed of organisms utilizing structural mineralization and field-based interactions as fundamental biological strategies, enabling survival in extreme conditions and representing a divergent evolutionary pathway that coexists alongside conventional life but remains largely hidden FMI, human awareness. And as the implications of this reality become fully apparent, researchers recognize that the human-sized tooth-like structure is not merely an isolated biological fragment, but the first tangible artifact from a domain of life that challenges conventional definitions and expands the concept of what biological existence can be, incorporating environmental forces and material properties once considered external to biological systems and redefining the limits of evolution on Earth and potentially beyond. And through this lens, the tooth becomes the cornerstone of a growing scientific revolution, demanding new tools, new theories, and new perspectives capable of understanding the profound complexity of life that thrives not in sunlight, but in pressure, darkness, and the raw energy of the planet's geological heartbeat. And as the investigation advances toward even deeper theoretical territory, the scientific world prepares to confront the possibility that the organism behind the tooth represents only the beginning of a far broader diversity of mineral-integrated species, occupying the hidden architecture of Earth's deepest environments, waiting to be revealed through the next wave of discovery. As the investigation surrounding the human-sized tooth-like structure reaches its final phase, and the accumulated body of evidence is synthesized across multiple scientific disciplines, researchers begin to understand that the artifact represents not simply a biological remnant nor a geological curiosity, but a profound indicator of a hidden domain within the Earth's deep ocean where biological, geological, and energetic forces converge to produce structures and organisms operating far outside the parameters of conventional evolutionary theory. And this realization becomes increasingly unavoidable as researchers analyze the completive composite data sets gathered across years of study, revealing a pattern of environmental conditions, energy field fluctuations, mineral anomalies, and unexplained harmonic signatures that together form a coherent picture of a dynamic ecosystem, far removed from the shallow water environments upon which most biological models are based. And within this emerging understanding, the tooth becomes the keystone linking disparate lines of inquiry into a unified framework suggesting the presence of organisms whose evolution has been shaped not by sunlight, oxygen, or traditional food webs, but by the immense pressures, fluctuating energy fields, and mineral-rich chemical gradients of the abyssal zones. And as researchers confront the implications of this reality, they recognize that the discovery marks a turning point in how humanity understands the limits and diversity of life on Earth, demanding new definitions and new scientific paradigms that encompass forms of existence previously dismissed as impossible or incompatible with known biological constraints. And as these paradigms take shape, they reveal that the deep ocean may host a biosphere operating according to rules reflective not of classical biochemistry, but of hybridized processes, integrating organic matter with inorganic substrates, electromagnetic fields, and geophysical dynamics to produce structures such as the tooth, which defy classification within any existing biological taxonomy. And this new conceptual space emerges from the realization that the tooth's structural complexity cannot be explained solely as the product of fossilization, mineral replacement, or conventional biomineralization, but instead represents an active, adaptive architecture shaped by environmental forces that sculpted its internal crystalline alignments, energy-resonant pathways, and pressure-resistant density along optimized patterns consistent with long-term biological use rather than post-mortem alteration. And as researchers model these structural optimizations, they conclude that the tooth's mechanical and energetic properties surpass those required for mere feeding, suggesting that its function must have extended beyond classical predatory mechanics and may have involved the modulation, conduction, or detection of environmental fields or vibrational energy, enabling the play organism to exploit deep ocean geophysical dynamics as part of its survival strategy. And this hypothesis gains further traction as researchers analyze the tooth's harmonic response to laboratory-replicated low-frequency oscillations, finding that the structure resonates at frequencies matching those periodically recorded in the deep trench where the tooth likely originated, and these frequencies correspond to neither tectonic nor hydrodynamic signatures but instead form a harmonic pattern suggesting periodic activity, which may reflect communication, signaling, or environmental interaction behaviors of a large unidentified organism. And if such resonance represented a biologically significant behavior, then the tooth may have served as a specialized organ used to amplify environmental vibrations, sense distant electromagnetic fluctuations, or regulate internal energetic processes, enabling the organism to synchronize with field conditions present in its deep ocean habitat. And these adaptations may have conferred extraordinary ecological advantages, allowing the organism to thrive in an environment where traditional biological resources are scarce, but energy fields, minerals, and pressure gradients are abundant and dynamic. And as researchers explore this possibility more deeply, they begin constructing theoretical models describing how such organisms may function as energy integrators, converting geophysical energy into usable biological power through mineral-enhanced resonant structures that operate analogously to piezoelectric or semiconductor materials, yet arise through natural adaptive processes rather than engineering. And if this is true, then the organism behind the tooth may represent a type of life that evolved to harvest environmental energy sources so distinct from conventional metabolic pathways that it forms effectively a parallel biology operating within its own rules and constraints, and influencing its environment in ways no conventional organism could. And this perspective forces scientists to reevaluate previously unexplained observations. From deep ocean expeditions, such as anomalous density distortions, unexplained low-frequency hums, and electromagnetic drift signatures, which may not have been geological phenomena, as once assumed, but biological activity of mineral-integrated organisms moving through the abyssal plains in ways that conceal their presence from optical and acoustic detection systems. And when these signatures are reanalyzed in light of the tooth's properties, a new pattern emerges, showing that many of the anomalies exhibit directional characteristics and rhythmic cycles consistent with organismal movement or communication, suggesting that the deep ocean may host not isolated individuals, but potentially entire populations of such organisms forming complex energetic ecosystems, whose interactions with geophysical structures shape their environment and may in turn be shaped by it. And these interactions may play roles in sediment redistribution, mineral cycling, thermal regulation, and electromagnetic field modulation, influencing deep ocean processes in ways previously attributed solely to geology. And this represents a profound shift in understanding, revealing that life in extreme environments may not only exist, but actively participate in the planetary systems that sustain the deep ocean's equilibrium. And as researchers explore the implications of this further, they recognize that such organisms could serve as critical components in the planet's long-term regulation of energy and chemical cycles, converting geophysical energy into biological processes and redistributing both in ways essential to plant, maintaining stability within trench ecosystems and potentially across larger oceanic regions. And if such organisms are widespread, their influence may extend far beyond what existing models can account for, suggesting that biological energy integration may form an unrecognized but essential component of Earth's deep ocean dynamics, linking life and geology in a symbiotic system with far-reaching implications for the biological energy our planet's evolution and stability. And as these discoveries accumulate, the scientific community begins acknowledging that the tooth marks a paradigm shift, not only in understanding life on Earth, but also in recognizing the diversity of environments capable of sustaining it, compelling researchers to abandon long-standing presumptions about the requirements for biological existence and open the possibility that life can evolve in environments governed not by organic chemistry alone, but by the fundamental forces of physics that shape planetary systems on geological scales. And in this way, the deep ocean becomes reimagined as a realm where biology and geophysics merge, creating organisms whose structures and behaviors reflect the underlying rhythms of the planet itself, and whose existence has remained hidden due to the constraints of human technology and perception. And as research continues, new expeditions equipped with field-tuned sensors penetrate deeper into previously unreachable trenches, detecting increasingly coherent electromagnetic patterns, suggesting the presence of large moving entities whose signatures align with predictions derived from modeling the tooth's resonant properties. And though visual confirmation remains elusive due to extreme depths and the organism's likely ability to minimize turbulence and acoustic reflections, the evidence continues to mount that the deep ocean hosts complex life forms fundamentally different from known species, yet deeply integrated with the planet's energy systems. And as these insights coalesce, the scientific narrative surrounding the tooth shifts from a search for classification toward a recognition that the object represents humanity's first direct physical contact with a class of organisms adapted to conditions at the boundary between matter and energy, between biological evolution and geophysical structure, operating in a realm where life adopts forms shaped by pressure, resonance, mineral integration, and the planet's electromagnetic heartbeat. And through this understanding, the tooth becomes the first artifact from a biological system whose existence forces science to reevaluate its assumptions, redefine its boundaries, and accept that Earth's deepest environments harbor mysteries not only of geology and chemistry, but of life itself. And in closing the final analytical report, researchers conclude that the human-sized tooth-like structure stands as definitive evidence of a previously unknown biological paradigm, one in which organisms develop anatomies integrating mineral, crystalline frameworks, energy-resonant pathways, and adaptive structures capable of interacting with and exploiting deep ocean geophysical processes. And though the true appearance, behavior, and ecological role of the organism remain unknown, the tooth provides irrefutable proof that such beings not only existed, but may continue to exist in environments far beyond the reach of conventional exploration. And the discovery marks the beginning of a new scientific frontier, wherein understanding life requires looking not only at organic chemistry, but at the full spectrum of physical forces shaping the planet and the vast unseen ecosystems thriving within the darkness and pressure of the abyss. And, as humanity prepares for deeper exploration, equipped with new technology and new theoretical frameworks, the tooth remains the first tangible link to a hidden world of biological and energetic complexity, waiting patiently in the depths for the moment when human understanding finally reaches far enough to witness it directly.
We upload new videos every single day, so make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's next. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps the channel grow. Tell us in the comments what you'd like to see next. Your ideas might be in our next upload. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of our community. Stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.